Hey everyone, today I'm going to talk to you guys about the biggest mistakes I've ever made with propagating. Making a plant create roots from its nodes is a bit of an art and definitely a science. It's really challenging to get a plant to do it successfully and have it do it repeatably with a low failure rate. So I'm going to give you some of my best tips I've learned over the years in doing propagations for a lot of time and killing literally thousands of different plants in the process. First thing up is humidity. It's super important that when you're propagating your plants, the air around that plant, humid and moist air. I just took this cutting out of this prop bag. I made this DIY prop box last week. Actually, some bed sheets came in it, but it simply captures moisture and keeps that water in that air and also keeps it a bit warm while these plants are propagating. And as you can see, the results were really good. Keeping the air humid around is vital for the root production of these plants. It's also important that you keep it ever so slightly cracked and make sure that humidity doesn't hit 100%, but maybe stays between like 80 and 90%, sometimes down to like 75, but really in the 80% is really the sweet spot. Too much humidity and it's going to be like raining effectively in your humidity dome. There's a lot of different ways you can use humidity domes. You can buy store-bought ones, or you can do DIY ones like this. You can also look up prop boxes where you essentially use a big clear Tupperware and do it that way also, but the concept remains the same, which is trap the humidity and the warmth inside this. That humid air is going to make sure when that plant breathes and opens its stoma, it's going to suck in water from that air because it doesn't yet have roots. And next up is warmth. So we talked about the warm air around the leaves of that plant. That's important to keep it really between like really north of 75 degrees Fahrenheit. I really like 82 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. But again, you don't want to go too high and kill off your plants or have them dry out too quickly. And that warmth also applies to the bottom of these roots. Increasing the root temperature to about 75 to 80 you can use a heating mat for this. You can use a back pain heating mat also, kind of anything to warm the bottom of them. I grow on metal racks here many times with a lot of my cuttings, and the lights just from being on the rack below them will warm the bottom of this, which will encourage the metabolism of that rooting and make sure roots develop. But again, not too hot in that root zone, not too cold. Next up is airflow. This container system is not ideal because it doesn't have any sort of air exchange or air movement. It's pretty important for even the cutting stage to have a light amount of air exchange and air movement around the cuttings. This will lead to less damping off, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But this airflow pertains to the top areas around the leaf and the stoma, which are the pores on the leaf, but it also pertains to the bottom part of the media, and that's the most important thing when you're propagating. I've been using these parfait cups a lot for tissue culture, but also for cuttings and kind of like just random pots I can pot into. But a big change occurred when I started putting holes in the bottom of these pots. These are just parfait cups from Amazon. And I also use these as little humidity domes because they come with a little cap to trap the humidity. I poke holes in the top of the cap and I poke holes in the bottom. And that right amount of humidity in the top around the leaf as well as the bottom, and therefore the air exchange between the two is very, very important, and I found a much greater success rate as soon as I put the holes in the bottom and the top. These are the typical humidity domes and bottom 1020 trays that I grow with here, and these vents are vital to the success of your cuttings. They have vents typically at the top and vents on the side of these, and that's very important. Again, I've also found that having holes in the bottom for the root air exchange is very important and leads to a higher success rate, at least in my grow room, with cuttings and also tissue culture. And also on that airflow and also kind of coming back to the media, this is a pothos from the propagation box. By the way, I cut these plants, stuck them in there for the video I made and didn't touch them. And put them under a mild amount of light, and they rooted really well. The great thing about this is keeping that media really loose. And then once this is rooted a bit more than this, I'll throw it in a pot with drainage. Again, airflow is super important to those roots and up above to the plant. You don't want a hard fan or anything blowing on them. So very gentle and light, but have that airflow down low and up top for your plants. And next up is the media, and really with the water in the media also relates to airflow. Chunky aeroid mix or something with a lot of air and holes in between it, that essentially the air could go through, down and through this and out the bottom. So when I plant this plant In here, it essentially will be exactly what was in that prop box, which is our 3-2-1 aeroid mix, which is 3 parts coconut husk, 2 parts perlite, and 1 part coconut coir or peat moss. I don't really like peat moss, but it is sterile, and that's good. We'll talk about that next. It's super important to be sterile. But the airiness in this media is the key to it. And also, don't overwater your media. Roots grow when there's not water. But I'll say that again, which is roots will grow when there's not water, which makes sense because the point of roots is to go look for water. There's actually a common tactic amongst a lot of growers, which is to kind of let their plants get really dry in the pot because they find that their root mass gets greatly increased. And as we talked about in the last video, the more roots your plant has, the more biomass and leaves or fruit it will produce. So it's super important to always take care of your roots, and you do that by not overwatering them. And also, speaking to fertilizer really quickly, in this aeroid mix, I have not yet added a slow release fertilizer or anything with a nitrogen in it. It's really important to avoid nitrogen. That's the first number on your fertilizer bag or on Osmocote. That first number, 15% nitrogen, that's what's in here. Then 9 and 12. That 15% nitrogen is going to inhibit rooting. It's going to stop rooting. Whereas phosphorus and potassium also actually have the ability to help rooting. Really, potassium, the final number. And that's why we use kelp to help boost the plant's root production in propagation. This is actually what I water all of my cuttings with, like this one. This is simply water with kelp in it and a little bit of vitamin B1. Again, doesn't have nitrogen, which would slow down the rooting of this plant. And coming up is the most important tip of all, sterilization. This is the most important lesson that I just keep learning over and over and over again. And to be honest, the reason why I keep succumbing to this issue is just laziness. There's a few thousand plants in this grow room, and there's just a couple of us, 3 of us actually, that work here. So it's a lot of work to take care of all of these different plants. And sometimes what I do when it's late, like it's 9 p.m. right now at work, and I want to transplant this Philodendron compostopartum, I grab a dirty pot. Yep, that has algae in it and was growing a plant in it before that's no longer growing it. That might mean we killed this plant. That might mean that this has pythium in it, root rot causing parasite, which also leads to damping off. This is what's killing most of my cuttings and a lot of my tissue culture. What I should do and what we do typically is take these pots and anything like growing trays, and we have to sterilize them. We either put them in the sun or we use alcohol or bleach to clean our tools. Super important to clean your scissors when you're taking cuttings. And you can always find a bottle of hydrogen peroxide in our shop within arm's reach, because after we're cutting, we're also sterilizing the wound that cut with hydrogen peroxide. But you can never really overdo it. That's also why operating rooms are so clean when you're dealing with humans. The same concepts apply. You don't want fungi or bacteria to get anywhere near that open wound. With plants, obviously, they are less serious, but if you want to have perfect success rate, it's all about sterilization. And when I talk about sterilization, I also mean your water. It's super important that when you're doing your water props, add in some hydrogen peroxide to that water, and it will oxidize in that water and kill off any of that pythium, root rot causing bacteria or parasites. Also, I've talked about bleach in your water too, something we've done for a long time here to have healthier and better success in cuttings. If you have a bunch of soil that you're not really sure if it's been sterilized yet, go ahead and take it and put it in a black trash bag, put it outside or something in a black bin that will heat up with the sun, and that sun is going to kill off the microbes and the issues that are inside of this soil. It's the reason why we use sterilized products that come directly from the factory, bagged up, and they're not sat outside collecting fungus gnats and pythium and all the other troubles that are out in the world. When we're starting these small plants like propagations and tissue culture, they need to focus on just making roots before they end up having to fight off the world. It's kind of when you have like a new baby, you don't want to expose that new baby to too much biological life yet, or else that biological life can take over the organism. That same thing happens with tissue culture and cuttings. But I got this plant from a friend, and look at how well the roots are doing on it. And this media is completely dry, but look at how many roots there are. This just speaks to the concept of, if you want to propagate, if you want to grow roots, if you want to grow starts, let the roots search for water. Obviously, don't starve them. I'm about to water this after this video, but allow your roots to go out and search for water, because it will develop a much greater and stronger root system. Thank you guys so much for watching this week's video. If you did enjoy learning about roots and propagation, please click the like down below or consider subscribing. We put out a new video about plants every Saturday. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.